Okay, so what we want to do today is continue with this era of change and talk more specifically about the environmental movement. So these are terms that we went over in the last video and our list of things that we want to make sure that we can do. All right, let's jump into it. The rights revolution of the 60s and 70s eventually influenced all aspects of American life, including people's right to a clean, safe environment. In 1962, a book called Silent Spring was written by a biologist named Rachel Carson. Some of you guys may have heard of that in maybe even some science classes, Silent Spring. It refers to this idea that if we don't do something about the environmental crisis, one day we're not going to hear birds anymore, right? I don't know if you guys have started to hear the birds chirp outside your windows yet, but it started at my house. We have a lot of birds, and we'll start to hear them a little bit in the morning. But if we don't do something, what if there's a silent spring? So that's where the name comes from. Rachel Carson points out that human actions are harming not only the environment, but people themselves. Public awareness of environmental issues prompted an important debate about the government's role in environmental regulations. 1962, Silent Spring. Use the tables to determine whether the 1970s environmental legislation had a positive, neutral, or negative impact on the environment and the American public. So we're going to be getting into more of some of the meat of these issues, but you have the Clean Air Act that we'll be talking about, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act. So let's start with the Clean Air Act. So since the Clean Air Act, which again we will be discussing, 60% of fine particle and ozone pollution has dropped. That's since 1970. 160,000 premature deaths have been prevented because of particulate pollution. 130,000 heart attacks, estimate, has been prevented, and 54,000 chronic cases of bronchitis have been prevented. Since the Clean Water Act, 66% of lakes in the U.S. Are still too polluted for swimming and fishing. 66%. Americans' water supply is supported by wastewater treatment plants, grew from 85 million in 1972 to 226.4 million in 2008, so that's a positive. And the Endangered Species Act, over 1,400 plant and animal species are managed with the Endangered Species Act, and those have grown. And in particular, you'll notice Clinton added 522 to the list. As the 70s drew to a close, a series of environmental crises made the headlines. They reinforced the public's concern about the environment and produced calls for even more far-reaching actions. Yet, at the same time, a number of people began to wonder if the government had enacted too many regulations and was threatening property rights. Rather than calling for more federal actions, they tried to limit the government's role in environmental protection. This is the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, how they organize by regions. And Superfund sites have to do with sites in these regions that are so environmentally degraded. I'm not saying that correct, but that they have to be dealt with. Let's see, new concerns surrounding pollution, the use of chemicals in the environment. This is DDT, was banned in 1972. It caused birth defects, cancers, and you can see it was just sprayed everywhere. Right here you have kids playing on the beach, and you see the men in that truck spraying DDT. It's a bug killer, but it did more than that. Issues surrounding environmental activism spur things like the establishment of Earth Day, the growth of the Audubon Society, the Sierra Club, the Wilderness Society, the Natural Resources Defense Council. And President Nixon creates the EPA in 1970, under his presidency, passes the Clean Air Act, which sets emissions standards and goals, also the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act. So we have a lot to complain about with Richard Nixon, but he does preside over an era of advancements in environmental policies. I want to talk about two issues One is Love Canal. Love Canal is a neighborhood that was determined to be very heavily polluted to the point that it was making the residents who drank the water in this community incredibly ill, with lots of different types of diseases, including the big one obviously being cancer. It was actually making them sick and killing them to live in their homes. The government ends up, after a series of battles, like quarantining the town, moving everyone out of that community. They've deemed it recently safe to live in. Eventually people will move back to Love Canal. So I'm going to play this video. Oh, sorry. I'm going to play this video about Love Canal, but I'm actually going to play it in the folder separately so that you can go in and view the video. Okay, so Love Canal. We'll pause on that. And then many people hope nuclear energy will also provide a safe alternative to fossil fuels, but there is an accident at 3 Mile Island in 1979 that will create resistance to a nuclear energy opportunity, and the accident is a near meltdown. And we're going to also discuss the issues surrounding nuclear energy, but again, since this is a longer video, also I'm going to put that separately in this folder. Okay? All right.